The story kicks off in Montana, USA, at a horse ranch. James Dyer, once a member of the Special Forces and a former CIA agent, is infamous for his reckless, lone wolf approach. Ignoring orders and going his own way got him booted from the agency. After years of keeping a low profile, his old boss, Collins, comes knocking with a mission. The target? Ollie, a dangerous man who'd slipped through their fingers before. Though locked up in the UK, Ollie still poses a serious threat to the US. After some convincing, Collins manages to rope James into the job, banking on the fact that James understands Ollie's mind better than anyone. James heads to the UK, where he teams up with Agent Terry, who's tasked with helping and keeping the communication line open with Collins. The plan is simple. Ollie, disguised as a priest, will show up at a church, and James will take him out with a sniper rifle. While Terry keeps an eye on things outside, ensuring no civilians get hurt, James sets up inside the church. But the crowd complicates things. It's tricky to get a clear shot without endangering innocent lives. Eventually, James locks in on Ollie and takes him down with one perfect shot. The sudden chaos leaves the police scrambling, unsure of what just happened. Using the confusion, James slips out through a back exit and hops into the getaway car with Terry. Their escape doesn't go as planned. A police officer spots them and opens fire, hitting Terry. Losing control of the car, they crash. Injured but determined, James drags himself out, sets the car ablaze to destroy any evidence, and goes on the run. Now, the police are on high alert, hunting Ollie's killer. Leading the investigation is Inspector Annette, who teams up with her father, Andrew. Meanwhile, Collins tries to sway Andrew into believing James is behind it all. But Andrew isn't so easily fooled. He suspects Collins is hiding something and insists they catch James alive to uncover the real story. While the manhunt intensifies, James lays low in an apartment that Terry had set up for him. As he rests, Emily, a young girl who knows both James and Terry, shows up unexpectedly. She claims she's looking for her cat, but it's clear there's more to her story. In reality, she saw James' condition and brought him food and medicine. When James asks about her family, Emily says she lives with her grandma. Watching the news together, Emily learns that Terry didn't survive, and James' face is plastered everywhere. Distraught, she confronts him, wanting answers about Terry's death and why James is hurt and in hiding. But James keeps his lips sealed. Elsewhere, Andrew reviews security footage from the church and spots James. Sensing something fishy, he warns Annette to keep this info from Collins. Andrew suspects Collins has his own agenda and advises Annette to handle the case carefully. Meanwhile, James contacts Collins, demanding to be brought back to the US. Collins assures him he's working on it, but James' instincts tell him something's off. Deciding to take matters into his own hands, James plans his return to America. At the airport, he notices undercover officers and realizes his face might be circulating. Thinking fast, he causes a distraction and makes a public announcement that draws the police away. Using the chaos, James retreats to a basement and messes with the lighting, creating a strobe effect that makes it hard for the officers to see. One by one, he disables them without lethal force. Eventually, he comes face to face with Andrew, who has a gun trained on him. James explains he's just following Collins' orders and had no intention of killing anyone. If he did, Andrew and the others wouldn't be standing. Andrew begins to lower his weapon, but Collins appears out of nowhere and shoots him. As Andrew falls, Collins fires at James, who narrowly escapes. Disguising himself as a pilot, James blends in and slips away unnoticed. When Annette discovers her father's body, grief turns to fury. Believing James is responsible, she launches a full-scale operation to capture him. The police trace him to Terry's apartment and surround it. Meanwhile, Emily helps James hide in her room. Despite the thorough search, the police find nothing and leave empty-handed. Frustrated, Annette orders James' photo to be broadcast widely, urging the public to report any sightings. Collins, knowing James is still alive, starts to panic. He's aware that James could expose his involvement or become a liability in a case back in the US. Meanwhile, James discovers that Emily's house once belonged to his parents. As he explores, he finds a newspaper clipping that reveals Emily's parents have passed away. Realizing she's been making up stories to cope, he feels a connection to her struggles. Emily, on the other hand, realizes the police are closing in on James and urges him to leave the country fast. James reaches out to Harris, a contact of Terry's who's an expert in forging identities. James asks for a fake passport, but Harris is hesitant, citing the heat on James. However, when James offers a hefty sum of money, Harris agrees to help. A short while later, Harris delivers the new passport, giving James a slim chance to escape. Harris, who initially appeared to be an ally, catches wind of the hefty bounty being offered by the police for any information about James. Tempted by the reward, Harris doesn't waste time and contacts the authorities to spill the beans. Meanwhile, James is patiently waiting at Emily's place, expecting Harris to show up with the passport. Emily sees James wearing a jacket that used to belong to her father, and she gets emotional. Through her tears, she tells James how much that jacket meant to her dad. To comfort her, James gently encourages Emily to face the truth about her father's passing. He even shares some lighthearted stories about his horses, successfully lifting her spirits and making her laugh. Emily, now in a slightly better mood, insists on going with James to retrieve the passport. James tries to talk her out of it, warning her about the dangers outside, but Emily argues that her presence might actually help since his face is plastered all over the city. Reluctantly, James agrees, and the two head toward Harris's shop. Once there, Emily goes inside first to scout for any danger. Her instincts prove right when she spots Annette and her entire team waiting in ambush. Keeping her cool, Emily quietly backs out of the shop and signals James to flee. While this is happening, Collins shows up at Harris's shop. He orders the team to back off, knowing that James's capture could jeopardize his own secrets. If James ends up in police custody, it could unravel everything Collins has been trying to cover up. Despite Collins's efforts to take control, Annette remains undeterred and continues the hunt for James. On the run, James uses his wits to stay a step ahead of Collins's men. Emily eventually returns home, searching for James, but he's nowhere to be found. Her grandmother approaches her, apologizing for not being as present as she should have been after Emily's parents passed. They share an emotional hug, promising to support each other better moving forward. Later that evening, Emily goes to her room and is surprised to find James there. He tells her he's decided to stop running and plans to surrender to the police to clear his name and expose the truth. Emily is left stunned by his decision. As James notices Emily's laptop, he recalls that it originally belonged to Terry, who often recorded his conversations with Collins. This sparks an idea, and he starts digging through the laptop for any incriminating evidence. Meanwhile, Collins, in a tense conversation with one of his men, stresses the urgency of eliminating James before things spiral further out of control. The next morning, James makes a bold move by calling Annette. He calmly lays out the truth, explaining how Collins manipulated him into killing Ollie and then framed him. James also reveals that Collins murdered Annette's father to keep him silent. He warns Annette that Collins is a threat not just to her, but to the entire department. James promises to hand over evidence against Collins if she agrees to meet him alone. As a backup plan, he tells her that if anything happens to him, the evidence can be found on Emily's laptop. Annette reluctantly agrees to the meeting. When they meet, James hands Annette a recording containing proof of Collins's shady dealings over the last 2 years. Annette, still torn, gives James a gun and declares that while the evidence clears him of some accusations, it doesn't make him innocent in her eyes. She insists on arresting him, but James doesn't stick around to argue. Just as he's leaving, Collins's men attack. Annette, realizing the danger, decides to join forces with James. Together, they fend off the attackers, with James skillfully taking down Collins's men one by one. The chase leads James and Annette to a dimly lit tunnel. James tells Annette to stay behind while he sets up traps to slow down their pursuers. Using his training, James neutralizes several attackers with precision. He eventually leads the remaining assailants to a construction site, where he continues to take them out. Despite his efforts, he knows the fight isn't over until Collins is dealt with. James tracks Collins to a nearby hotel. Collins, spotting James, starts shooting recklessly, putting innocent lives at risk. Taking cover, James returns fire in intervals, and the two engage in a tense shootout. James gets injured but manages to land a lucky shot, hitting Collins in the ear. Enraged, Collins becomes reckless, giving James the opportunity to escape. Shortly after, Annette arrives at the hotel with her team. Now fully convinced of Collins's guilt, she feels no remorse as she oversees the scene. Collins's lifeless body is found, and Annette orders her team to round up the rest of his men. She also ensures that everyone involved is taken into custody, determined to clean up the mess Collins left behind. Meanwhile, James, still nursing his injuries, prepares to leave the city. Emily finds him and begs to join him, but James refuses. He explains that staying with him would only put her in harm's way and insists she stay with her family, where she'll be safe. Despite her protests, James remains firm and says his goodbyes. Not long after, Annette visits Emily and confesses that she had the chance to capture James, but chose to let him go. She acknowledges that James saved her life and believes he's not the villain he's been made out to be. A few weeks later, Emily receives an unexpected letter containing 2 tickets to America. The sender is none other than James, inviting Emily and her grandmother to visit his horse farm. When Emily and her grandmother arrive at the farm, they're greeted warmly by James. He takes the time to teach Emily how to ride horses, bringing a sense of peace and closure to their tumultuous journey. With laughter and a fresh start, they embrace a new chapter in their lives, leaving behind the chaos that brought them together.